Hi, and welcome to Explorer Live for February 2021. I'm David Curtis. Thanks for joining us today. Coming up in this episode, Wood Mackenzie's Alex Beaker joins us to discuss whether explorers should have hope for 2021. Bruce Cutright will be talking geothermal energy and about the Perseverance rover that just landed on Mars. Jasper Ocean highlights a water project in Peru funded by SEG's Geoscientists Without Borders, which is also supported by the AAPG Foundation. And Bob Merrill returns with an overview of what's coming up in the bulletin for this month. But first, I'd like to welcome AAPG President Rick Fritz. Rick, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, David. Glad to be here.
Yeah, well, hey, it's been snowy and very cold in our part of the country this week. I see you have the planet Mars behind you. Are you and Mary looking at real estate?
No, that's in honor of the Perseverance rover, as you mentioned, that landed yesterday. We had a watch party at AAPG, and we expected about 50 people. We had 500 participants. NASA and JPL did a great job. It was an exciting look into the future of planetary exploration.
Yeah, no, we had a fun time yesterday. I was participating as well. Your column this month, you talked about the future, and you really talked about that in your column this month. Tell us about your desire to be a futurist.
Yes, I went to a talk years ago. It was like the past mayor of Indianapolis he had the title of futurist, which is a title I've always coveted. I always wanted to be a futurist. It's like, but I've not earned it. So, but I've been reading a lot of predictions for 2021 from various magazines, papers, and blogs. So now I'm about as close that I'll ever get. So I have a few predictions for you.
All right, that's good. So, let's just kick off. What do you expect for the future of 2021?
Well, of course, right now, the first one's easy. It's the world's future is tied to the COVID-19 virus. There seems to be some optimism tied to vaccines and herd immunity. The number of new cases is dropping significantly. Of course, distribution of the vaccines is a key concern. AAPG leadership and staff are paying particular attention to vaccine distribution, plus state and city COVID-19 rules as we prepare for a face-to-face ACE in Denver on May 23rd, 26th. We are continuing to evaluate the situation day by day, so just keep tuned and we'll let you know.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. I mean, obviously, all eyes are on the economy. What do you think about the economy looking forward?
Well, based on what I've read and know, most likely the world will have a mixed economy this year. But governance, as you can see in the U.S., will pivot from supporting workers who have lost their jobs to keeping companies from failing. Nevertheless, there is a sense that economies are recovering. Now, AAPG, like most professional associations, lost our financial engine during the pandemic. These are the face-to-face conferences that provide revenue to pay for other programs. Since March of 2020, most face-to-face conferences have been canceled or postponed, and along with that goes our revenue. But as a result, AAPG has made major spending cuts to reduce costs. I have to say AAPG staff, under the guidance of the executive committee, have done a great job at managing the budget, and now we are getting closer to break even. But we point out that came at a great cost. We had to lay off a significant number of staff, and we've had to cut programs.
Yeah, it has been a challenging year. Now, as you look forward, there's a lot of talk about the future of oil and gas. So what do you see for the future of petroleum in 2021?
Well, APG works closely with our sponsoring organizations and exhibitors to understand the marketplace and jobs. For 2021, it appears the oil and gas industry will continue to be in a state of consolidation and evolution. Focus will be on innovation, best practices, well efficiency, and cutting costs. Capital will be a premium, even though oil prices are over $50 a barrel, now 60 at this time. But banks are starting to lend money again. That's a good sign. Many companies will be structured, though, quite differently than before COVID-19 crisis. With 2050 zero emission goals, it's very clear that companies are changing their culture to the sustainable development of petroleum resources and other forms of energy. For companies, this is a critical step for continued investment, social license, and to attract quality talent.
That's it's interesting because our industry, as you say, is going through significant changes. And how do you see us as an association responding to this increased focus on sustainability?
Well, oil and gas will be needed well into the future. Everyone knows that. But companies will increase focus on the impact of climate change to energy needs. Banks, private equities, and corporations will continue to expand investment into decarbonization. Many geologist engineers will still be employed in oil and gas, but already companies are repurposing their employees to work on sustainable issues. Now, APG is developing and supporting the science of CCUS, and is holding its first major North American CCUS conference virtually on March 23rd through 25th of this year.
Yeah, and that's going to be a great conference. We're looking forward to that. Now, shifting gears a little bit, you talk in your column about our virtual world and how, our ability to communicate through technology is really transforming how we do our work. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, as we know, our office life has changed forever.
Yeah.
Virtual work will be, from home will become a standard, both for convenience and cost savings. There'll be some going back face-to-face as well. But, APG staff has worked virtually since March 2020, and they have not missed a step in providing the services to members. So, we actually conduct staff work from all over the world from our locations. It's a question whether you even need a central area or not to work from. The one positive thing we learned in 2020 is that we could deliver our science virtually around the world. We are reaching a lot more professionals than we ever have.
Yeah, you talk about science, and obviously that's one of our principal focuses and product areas. When you think about APG, and we talked about sustainability, we've talked about sort of new approaches to delivering science. What do you think about APG's brand as we look forward to the future?
Well, brands, not just for APG, but for everyone in this post-COVID environment, must be authentic and value-driven. This is very important for APG as we figure out what our members need and want in the workforce. Hopefully we'll get back to face-to-face meetings soon, but we will continue to provide virtual programs. Some companies, including APG, will take this time to rebrand. We are in that process, trying to understand what new products we need to provide to members in oil and gas, but certainly in sustainable development and emission science. We're working to provide more opportunities as well through our diversity, equality, and inclusion programs.
We're obviously 2 months into 2021. There's a long time left here in this year. But as you look forward through the rest of this year, what do you see for APG in the future?
Well, one thing, as I've said before, APG will not abandon its roots. Sustainable oil and gas development will be needed for decades to come. The reality is the world needs energy. Think of the amount of energy just to develop, test, produce, transport, and distribute the COVID-19 vaccines. It's tremendous. The cloud is now one of the top consumers of power in the world. Energy exploration and development will lift poverty from companies around the globe, so it's needed. Our primary hope, David, for 2021 is things get better and safer with more job opportunities. You may have heard it said that the best way to predict the future is to create it. Well, here is our opportunity. And like Perseverance, I wish everyone a safe landing in 2021.
Indeed, Rick. Let's create that future. It's great to see you. Stay warm, and we'll see you next month.
Thanks a lot.
Hi, everybody. Vern Stefanik here for Explorer Live. We just heard Rick Fritz talk about the future. Well, if you thought that was interesting, this is really going to grab your attention. I have with me today Alex Beaker, who's the principal analyst in corporate analysis for international research and consultancy group Wood Mackenzie. And Alex was featured in this month's Explorer in a story that had this headline: Can oil explorers dare to hope in 2021? Now that grabbed my attention. I'm sure it grabbed everybody's attention too. Alex, how are you? Welcome to Explorer Live.
Hey, Vern. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hey, it's great having you. And so let's just let's get right into it. What's the answer? Can oil explorers dare to hope? Is there something positive that we can look forward to in 2021?
Yeah. As you know, like with tight oil, most things come down to oil prices, and we've been fortunate to see a pretty big rally over the past couple months. WTI has surpassed $60 a barrel, which we haven't seen since 2019. Or early 2020 rather, before COVID. So the rally from 50 to 60 can't be understated for U.S. tight oil. At 50, things are still on the margin. Companies are barely scraping by. They're able to maybe turn a small profit. But at 60, especially with a much more restrained, production growth and CapEx outlook, cash flow looks just incredibly better. Companies are going to be able to pay down debt and probably increase some dividends and share buybacks, which should attract outside interest to the sector.
Well, and that's great. And are you are already seeing signs of that going on?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think the most important thing going on right now is that we've learned, shale has learned from their mistakes in the past. And, whenever we've seen a big rally in oil prices historically, so whether it was coming out of the 2016 downturn or what have you, companies always race to add rigs back to the field and try and grow production aggressively again. We're not seeing that this time around. We have seen an increase, an uptick in the rig count, but nothing to the magnitude that we've seen previously. And that just helps the overall health of the sector. Shale has been categorized either by boom times or bust times. But now finally in 2021, we look to be finding that equilibrium point where, we can look to the future with more stability than we ever have in the past.
Yeah. And it's good to know that there's other people that are looking at the industry in a good way because, oh my gosh, 2020 was historically horrible and historically awful. And I'm sure you saw evidence of, well, I don't know. Why don't you tell us how was the industry perceived at that point by the general public, by the financial people?
Yeah. It was 2020 was a very rough year. Thinking back to probably the lowest point, we all remember when oil prices traded negative for the first time in history back in May 2020, June. A lot of companies, oil prices were still below the point where they could even make money on just the flowing production. Let it completely ignore the fact of, trying to drill new wells. So that's where we saw a lot of companies shut in a good amount of production for most of May, June, and July. Fortunately, now a lot of that has been restored. And as soon as WTI started to creep above 30 and towards 40, that got to be the point where almost all flowing production in the lower 48 is economic at those levels. So the next phase in the recent rally was then, okay, companies see $40 a barrel, they see $50 a barrel. Okay, now they can justify some increased activity, versus say Q3 2020 levels is really where the rig count bottomed out. We've added almost 200 rigs since that point. But, we're quick to point out to clients, who are skeptical, these rig counts are just going towards mitigating declines. So just because you see an increase in the rig count of 200 rigs doesn't mean that we're going back towards, 1 million, 2 million barrels a day year over year growth rates. We're still, and we think more rigs are even needed just to get to the point where you can hold production flat in 2021. Yeah. But that's a more restrained view on production, but this is an extreme positive for cash flow and profitability, paying down debt, like I said before. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, and speaking of the rig count and the production and all of that, production, that's probably going to decline this year. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, that is a fair statement. We have production decline of around 400,000 barrels a day this year versus 2020. And that's mostly, again, don't read too much into that number. That's mostly an effect of the momentum. There's kind of a time lag between adding a rig, seeing an uptick in the price, adding the rig in the field, adding the completion crew in the field. By the time the well gets completed and starts to add to production, it could be 6 months or so. So, we're seeing an uptick in the rig count right now. That'll probably have a bigger effect on, say, the second half of 2021, more so in 2022. And that's where we see the U.S. return, to year-over-year production growth.
Okay. Well, okay. So tied in and keeping in that theme, I know you are an analyst, not necessarily a crystal ball gazer, but if we're looking ahead, if you were going to throw a dart on the price of oil and gas, natural gas, where do you think that's going to be going?
Yeah, well, I think we see oil prices averaging around $55 a barrel WTI for this year and next year. And obviously we're a little bit above that right now. Certainly a volatile industry. There's going to be some movement to the high side and low side. I think it's important to remind listeners that, OPEC still has a lot of production off the market. And we would expect that production to come back to the market and may limit some of the upside in the near term. But long term, with the lack of, exploration going on in the industry and just a tighter supply demand balance in the future, we do see oil prices, WTI, getting to around $80 a barrel by the end of the decade. So much higher than where we are today. So certainly some, long-term optimism there, in addition to the near term.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. So I'm wondering in all of this, we're looking at these trends that are going on. We know that in the trenches, there's always some winners and some losers. Some companies do better than others in doing all of this. And I guess as we start to wrap this up, I'm wondering which basins and perhaps even companies do you see as being in position to benefit from the trends?
Yeah, that's a great question. That not all shale companies are created equal. So there, unfortunately, we did see a lot of Chapter 11 bankruptcies in 2020. As companies struggled to get by. There's also, a handful of companies that would have been in a very difficult spot had oil prices continued to stay near $40 a barrel. So this recent rally, while it's been good to the larger companies, the EOGs, the Pioneers, the ConocoPhillips, those companies were probably going to be okay, even in a lower price environment, for extended period of time. This has really been a life raft for, companies like Callon and SM and Laredo, these companies that do have, overstretched balance sheets, really got some breathing room with this recent run up to 60. Now, in terms of basins, we're really keeping our eye on the Powder River this year. That's been one that's been on the back burner for, probably 5 years or more. There's been a lot of analogies trying to draw the stacked pay, similarities to the Permian. We don't quite think it's next Permian, but we do think a play like that deserves increased investment this year. Unfortunately, you saw a play like the Powder River and even the Bakken. Activity just dropped to rock bottom levels in 2020 as, companies who operate there typically have more core acreage positions in plays like the Permian. So if you look at, EOG, they sort of dropped all Bakken and Powder River activity and just focused on the Permian because that's kind of their core, asset. Well, now with this increase in price, we estimate more than 3,000 drilling locations are economic in the Powder River below $50 a barrel WTI. So that means the returns are even greater now that we're at 60. So, we think we'll see, some increased activity there. You also just this week saw Continental confirm that they acquired Samson Resources, Powder River acreage position there. Chesapeake has a material Powder River position. Coming out of bankruptcy, they haven't allocated a lot of capital to that basin. We think it could potentially be a divestment candidate. If Chesapeake gets the right price, they seem to be focused a little bit more on gas lately. So yeah, Powder River, I would highlight as one that we're really watching. Of course, a rally to 60 is always going to help a play like, the Permian too. We just think and hope growth will be much more modest going forward. so shale can stop being classified as this boom or bust sector, and more stability we think would attract more longer term investors looking for stable dividends and that type of thing.
Okay, great answer, great information. Thank you so much. The name of the article in the February Explorer is "Can Oil Explorers Dare to Hope in 2021?" Alex Beaker is one of the important voices in that article, and you've been great talking to us again today. Alex, thank you for that, and we look forward to talking to you again sometime soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Vern.
Hello, I'm Susan Nash, AAPG. I'm delighted to be able to have a chat with Bruce Cutright, who has written a very interesting article for the Explorer. So welcome, Bruce.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. Good to be here.
So I love the whole topic of your article. It had to do with geothermal energy, and it's coincidentally too, you're the chair of the geothermal committee of the Energy Minerals Division. So it seems very appropriate. But could you give us a little highlight about what you talked about in the article?
Certainly. I think what's most important for AAPG members is that we are energy professionals, and obviously our history has always been focused on oil and gas, but there's always a component to that of we're dealing with subsurface resources. And I think what we try to do within the geothermal committee within Energy and Minerals Division is to emphasize that all of the heat that we recover while we've been looking for oil and gas is an energy resource. And to this point, it's been largely neglected. So all the science, all the engineering that we've used to find oil and gas, it's all applicable to finding heat, which we can use to produce electricity.
So when you're talking about finding heat, are you talking about geothermal resources that are in tectonically active areas, or are you talking about what you would encounter in an abandoned oil well or in an oil well?
Well, that's really the classic question. Traditional geothermal is always focused in the tectonically active ring of fire, volcanic zones, those sorts of things. And the techniques and geology of those areas are very different from the large sedimentary basins that we've produced oil and gas from. But those large sedimentary basins actually far exceed the reservoirs that have traditionally been developed in geothermal around volcanic areas. As the classic deep Gulf Coast, we were drilling into zones there that are typically well above 300 degrees Fahrenheit. All we need to produce geothermal energy is temperatures that exceed something on the order of 270, 280 degrees. So we've neglected this huge resource. The well-defined sand bodies, petroleum traps that we've looked at, these are traps for hot brines as well. So we've got an energy resource we need to focus on.
I love that because, in the past, especially in the Gulf of Mexico, heat was the enemy. And you go, oh my gosh, we've got molten sulfur or something, there are all these things that could occur. Now it's actually a positive.
It is. And all the well design that we use to produce oil and gas, we can use those same designs. And the advantage here is instead of just trying to pick the top of a stratigraphic trap or a dome, something like that, where the oil or gas resources have been trapped. Now we've got the entire sand body, all of which is usually saturated with hot brines that we can use to produce high volumes of fluids that through generators at the surface produce electricity.
So I'm glad you mentioned the generator. So what does that look like? Do you have like a heat exchanger, and then do you convert it into steam and run turbines, little mini turbines right there and use that to develop electricity on site? That's
correct. There's really two primary types of reservoirs. There's what's called an organic Rankine cycle or binary cycle generator, in which the hot brines are brought to the surface. You run them through a heat exchanger. The secondary working fluid, the binary fluid, is what actually drives the turbine. And that secondary working fluid usually has a lower boiling point than water. So you have an organic liquid steam that is driving the turbine. The other primary method is really what's called flash steam, and you can have one or two steps in that. But because we're bringing fluid to the surface that's been under pressure, it's not boiling in the subsurface, but as it comes up the well or at the surface, when you release the pressure, a certain portion of it will flash to steam. And you can take that steam directly to drive a turbine and capture it after it goes to the turbine and re-inject it back into the ground. So two primary methods. The flash steam is usually used when you have higher temperatures, usually above about 450 degrees Fahrenheit.
Oh, wow. I love that. So once you have the electricity, do you just string a wire out into the grid, or do you do something with it on site?
No, you generally hook into the grid, or it's developed where you have a large user that needs reliable power. That's one of the other things about geothermal power generation. Those generators have the highest online availability of any other generating method. And that is, it's better than natural gas, it's better than coal, it's better than nuclear. The geothermal generators are so reliable that they are generally online at least 97 to 98% of the time. The only time they come offline is for routine maintenance.
That's amazing. And I'm thinking also of the only time I can think of when I remember hearing about a catastrophic failure was when there were eruptions in the Big Island, and I think Mauna Loa, a flow went into the
right. Well, it's called the Puna geothermal plant on the Big Island of Hawaii. And it wasn't really the plant that failed. Unfortunately, the plant was built lower than the magma pool in the top of the volcano. And of course, when that erupted, you had a fracture zone that ran right underneath the plant, and you had lava come very close to the plant. It didn't actually hit the plant, but it did cover some of the production wells, and it did go through the warehouse of the operator of that particular plant. So that shut it down for a period of time.
Yeah, I guess it's a little bit inaccessible for a while.
A little bit, yes, ma'am.
So another question I have, and I've had this question for a long time. Okay, so we know that the Yellowstone caldera is amazing, and it's turned out to be larger than we ever expected. Like the chambers, there are that extend even toward California. So, is there any way that we can turn the Yellowstone caldera before it, of course, erupts? It's a massive eruption. The fear of a periodic eruption from the Yellowstone resource is real, and we've been very lucky that nothing has happened at least in recorded history. But for geothermal power generation, really what you're doing is you're capturing the groundwater circulation system around the magma body. And because of the national status of the Yellowstone resource, we wouldn't want to do anything that would influence the geysers or the scenic beauty of that. So someplace outside of the park, away from the geysers, might be appropriate to develop. That makes sense. So we could do it more like they do it in Iceland, where I didn't get a chance to visit that, and it was interesting. They inject seawater into the magma.
Well, exactly. Most of the normal circulation in Iceland is from seawater working and being heated by the hot magma bodies, and then the Iceland geothermal wells capturing that seawater and using it to produce power. They generally use flash steam generators there. Mm-hmm. And then they have, there's one 30 megawatt flash steam generator that has an 18 megawatt binary cycle generator that takes the fluid after it goes through the primary flash steam generator and generates additional power. So they've got a great situation. And if anybody wants to visit a wonderful country, I've been there several times and love Iceland.
Well, thank you so much. This is really exciting. And do you have any last words about the future?
Well, again, as we talked about before, my goal is to really emphasize to our membership that heat recovery is as important a resource as the petroleum resources that we've been working on for the last 150 years. So I hope everybody is successful in thinking about that as a part of our energy mandate.
Well, thank you. And again, we've been speaking with Bruce Cutright, and don't miss his entire article, the full article in the Explorer. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
So yesterday we had an amazing event. We had a Mars Perseverance watch party, and we collectively together watched the successful landing. So now that the rover's on Mars, what would you think that it will bring us?
Oh, tremendous. Well, I think the key thing is to understand how Perseverance is different from the other rovers that we've had on Mars. Perseverance brings the ability first to travel much faster than the other rovers, but the camera systems that are set up are focusing on two different things. One is the ability to give very broad view of Mars, and the other is to have an extremely detailed microscopic view of the sampling areas and the samples that are being collected. So those two things are critical. The Ingenuity helicopter on Mars, that's the first time that has ever been attempted. And that'll be, well, everyone knows if you have a drone and the ability to bring your drone up to altitude to see the entire area of exploration that you're working in, rather than just where you're standing in the footprint, that is going to be a tremendous benefit. The third thing that we really is tremendous is that the analysis systems that Perseverance has is going to be analyzing the generation of oxygen on Mars. And if that's successful, which we're sure it will be or hope it will be, that's the first step in situ resource utilization for establishing a permanent residence for humans on Mars.
Oh, that's so interesting. We'll find out if the processes on Mars, for example, of deposition, et cetera, are the same.
Oh, yeah. Just from the photographs, we know we have cross bedding, we have deltaic deposits, sand deposits, submarine and aeolian deposits, both. So we have a huge geologic environment to work in. And now we've got a robotic instrument that can give us almost the same detail as what an astronaut on Mars would give us.
I'm super interested in the diagenetic alteration aspect of the Martian atmosphere and also subsurface.
Oh, yes, absolutely. The recent movie, The Martian, emphasized the disaster, windstorms, and those sorts of things. The atmosphere there is so thin that you could have 100 to 120 mile an hour wind and you'd barely notice it. Of course, on Earth, because of the higher density of the atmosphere, you wouldn't be able to even stand in that velocity of wind. But it does emphasize that we've got active geologic environments, deposition occurring now, erosion occurring now. So the ability to understand those processes, to see both the present processes that are going on and how they have created deposits in the past that we can study. This is a great step that we've been able to do. The JPL team, the designers of that robotic explorer, need to receive a huge congratulatory thank you from all of us.
Oh, absolutely. And want to thank you, Bruce. This was a wonderful interview and I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you back soon.
You bet. Glad to do it. And I think over the next, the Perseverance energy source will only last 14 years. So we have a great future to look forward to from Perseverance.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, thank you.
You bet. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Explorer Live. This is Bob Merrill, and today I'm interviewing Jasper Ocean, who put together a program for the titled Student-Led Water Development in the Andean Puna. And this project was supported by the AAPG Foundation and really was a project of the Geoscientists Without Borders program that the foundation supports. So welcome, Jasper.
Thank you, Bob.
So Jasper, my first question is, what got you interested in Zurite, Peru?
I first went to Zurite as an exchange student when I was studying as an undergrad. And I had been studying international relations, but had limited experience traveling outside the United States. And so I was searching for a program where I could spend some time, actually take a semester off away from academics and work on Spanish and perhaps do some volunteering. And I found a organization that was based in Peru, in which I could live with a host family in Zurite and do some archaeological work. And so I was lucky enough to be placed with a wonderful family, and I've been friends with them to this day. And then my relationship with Zurite has led to additional projects over the years.
That's very interesting. And tell me a little bit about Zurite in terms of what the community and what they do.
Sure. It's an agrarian community, so it's dependent upon agriculture. Most people there devote themselves to agriculture, and families, either small families or extended families, have plots of land that are scattered around the community. And the city itself is built on an alluvial fan. It's about 30 to 40 kilometers to the northwest of Cusco, and it's at an elevation of over 3,400 meters.
Good. And what's the environment around there? In the article, you said that it gets 855 millimeters of rain a year. Well, that's about 33 inches. Mm-hmm. So if that was, what does that do for the environment?
Yeah, so there is about 800 millimeters of annual rainfall, but there's a distinct wet and dry season. And so we're within the tropics in Zurite, but just into the southern hemisphere. And the southern hemisphere summer is their rainy season. So it rains there between December and May. That's when the vast majority of rain falls. And then the dry winter months extend from June through September. And so this agriculturally dependent community derives most of their water for irrigation from the mountains that are directly above Zurite. And there's a particular watershed there, the largest watershed, which is called the Ramuschaca, and that's been the focus of our study. So the community is dependent upon irrigation water, most of it coming from the mountains that rise a vertical kilometer above the town. And this contrast between the wet and dry season places water stress on dry season in terms of searching for water resources to maintain the agricultural production.
So this stress on the water resources, and particularly the dry season, what's the physical environment like? You talk about the Puna biome.
Puna grasslands are seasonally dry grasslands, and they exist above the tree line and below the permanent snow line. So you can think of the environment as existing at the limits of where vegetation can grow. And in the upper part of the Ramuschaca, there's structure and organization to the landscape where there are uplands that are covered in seasonally dry grasses. And then there are low gradient basins within the upper part of the watershed that are peat forming wetlands. And they are known locally as bofedales. And so altogether, they're part of this Puna ecosystem that is at the limits of where vegetation can grow. And we think that they are important to downstream water users, and particularly these bofedales, which act as sponges that hold water that allow for the streams that originate in these upland watersheds to be perennial rather than annual or ephemeral streams.
So is the water that's been used historically in the Zurite region, is that stream water, or is it flowing through aquifers? And what are the aquifers?
The majority of the water that they use for irrigation is stream water, and it comes from the upper Ramuschaca watershed, which is in the Puna that exists a kilometer above the town of Zurite. And so we think of the bofedales, or these peat-forming wetlands, as shallow aquifers that drain to surface streams, and the streams flow down to the community, and they're diverted for agriculture. The town of Zurite derives their drinking water from groundwater that flows through fractures and emanates from springs along a large range front fault that's just above the community of Zurite.
So what's the lithology of the fractured reservoirs then for the geologists who are listening?
Primarily sandstone. There is some karsted limestone up in the top part of the watershed, but the vast majority of the lithology is sandstone and some conglomerates and mudstones that are of Eocene age approximately. And there's a large intrusive quartz monzonite complex that exists right above Zurite and then into the western part of the Ramachaka watershed.
One of the focuses of Geoscience Without Borders is the involvement of students. And in the paper that you wrote, or the article you wrote, you said there were 29 students who participated in the program. Mm-hmm. Where were they from, and what was their background?
So we've had students come from, but primarily from Humboldt State University, which is my home institution, and other students have joined us from Temple University, University of Texas, Austin, and University of Michigan. And then we've also had students join us from the Universidad Nacional Mayor de San Marcos in Lima, and then the Universidad Nacional San Antonio Abad de Cusco in Cusco. So it's a nice mix of students from both U.S. institutions and from Peru. And these students come primarily from geology and engineering backgrounds, but we've had students join us from film and then also from environment and community.
And how did the students participate in the project? What did they do?
The students who are based at Humboldt State University enroll in a year-long program where they have a semester worth of preparatory work before traveling to Peru. And over that preparatory semester, we introduce students to the project and the overall goals. And we introduce students to research in terms of how to conduct a literature review, how to frame a research question. And so students arrive in Peru, in Zurite, with some preparation about the background, and they have specific goals in mind that then contribute to the overall goals of the project. We're in Zurite for a month, and so those students are living with host families, and they're working on the research up at the upper part of the Ramachaka watershed. And that research includes hydrologic analyses, shallow geophysics surveys, engineering surveys, flying of drone to collect surface data, and then also interaction with the community in Zurite and some touristic activities. And then when we come back in the fall semester, those students enroll in independent research projects. And so the faculty serve as advisors, and those students conduct independent research that also contributes to the overall project goals. And we ask that students think about how their research connects to the community by including a capacity building statement that links the science to the society.
That sounds great. Now, another part of your project that I found intriguing was that you partnered with Engineers Without Borders to help with the irrigation system. How did that go?
So that was primarily through one of the PIs on the project, Margaret Lang, who's a professor of environmental resources engineering here at Humboldt State. And she has she's collaborated with the Peruvian engineers and then also led analyses of engineering students here at HSU to help design and do cost benefit analysis for the canal construction project. And so we partnered with the community of Zurite, the municipality of Zurite, and then the Farmers Union on a project that was over $80,000, a canal infrastructure project. And so Geoscientists Without Borders contributed $20,000 to that project. And then we also provided some engineering expertise to help in the design and then also pay for the construction of the canal.
Great. Thank you. This has been very interesting. And I think it's wonderful to see groups and involving a lot of students helping build the geoscience profession. And we really appreciate your part in this, Jasper. And hopefully we'll see some additional projects that involve the application of geosciences to humanitarian efforts. Thank you very much, Jasper.
Yep. Thank you, Bob.
Hi, Vern Stefanik back with Bob Merrill, who's back. You just saw him do a wonderful interview about the Geoscientists Without Borders. Bob, you really did a good job on that. How are you today,
Thanks,
sir?
Vern. Doing great, thanks. Warming up, and it's great.
Good to know. Now, and before we're going to talk a little bit about a very special issue of the bulletin that's coming up. Before then, though, I just, in the transition after having spoken with Jasper like you did, just want to mention you personally have been involved in Geoscientists Without Borders. Isn't that correct?
Yes, I've been part of the committee for almost over 5 years now, I believe. And I've been chairman of the committee that choose the projects, and they brought me back last year as an interim. So I've been quite heavily involved with my volunteer time with GWB.
Oh man! Well, you all are doing great work, and again, the APG Foundation is one of the groups that supports this program, which means all of our members have an opportunity to be part of it with their gifts. So, great work by you.
Thanks. When I learned of Geoscientists Without Borders, I actually started advocating and telling people within AAPG that AAPG needs to support this kind of work. Yeah, absolutely. And you are a wonderful, passionate advocate for that. Just to talk a little bit in the short time that we have left, though, because there is something exciting and important coming out that was we first read about it in the February Explorer, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about a special issue of the bulletin coming out. And I believe it's going to deal with deep to ultra deep petroleum systems. Could you tell us about that? Yes, Vern. One of my initiatives as editor is to put together special issues on specific topics. Many of the members will have received an example of the Super Basins Bulletin in last December. So this particular issue, and as a geologist, I've been a geologist long enough that I've seen many different paradigms busted. Well, in the last 2 decades, frontier exploration has busted the paradigm that basins deeper than 5,000 meters will not produce commercial reserves beyond dry gas and very tight rock. Well, we know now, after the last 2 decades of work, that that's not the case. Well, the reason it was that the temperature was deemed to be too high to preserve liquid hydrocarbons, and the fact that pressure, lithostatic load decreases porosity and permeability, so liquids wouldn't flow at these depths in these rocks. Well, as I said, this is wrong. We have both sandstone and carbonate reservoirs producing at these extreme depths, both gas and liquids. So the purpose of this special issue is to explore that, because of our belief that the analogs that we have are key to better understanding on how petroleum systems work in our efforts to address the commerciality for exploration and development programs. So where are we going to find new ones? Analogs are critical.
So are there specific areas of the planet that you're kind of hoping to have papers submitted?
Well, these deep hydrocarbons have been found in the Gulf of Mexico, in the Tarim Basin in China, in the Nile Delta. So it's a global phenomenon. The principal organizer for this effort is from China. The Chinese geoscientists have a very strong interest in this. So as part of I'm sure there'll be a number of papers from Chinese basins, and I'm encouraging them to get examples from other basins, such as the Gulf of Mexico and the Nile Delta.
Those who are interested in getting more information and to submit some papers, the information is online, is that correct?
The information's online. It was in the announcement. And if anybody needs help finding the editor for the special issue, the organizer, they can also get me directly.
Got it. Bob, it's always great to talk to you, and this month especially because of this exciting new opportunity that we have for more geoscience to come into the world. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the idea and for pushing this project, and thanks for being with us again today.
You're quite welcome, Vern. It's good talking to you as always, and have a good day.
That's all the time we have for this episode. But as we close, I want to send our best wishes to the many AAPG members in Texas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma who've suffered significant impact and damage with the recent snow, ice, and extreme cold temperatures that have blanketed much of the United States. We're all looking forward to spring. We're also looking forward to being back again next month with another edition of Explorer Live. Until then, stay safe, stay warm, stay connected, and keep exploring.